What if we're meant to live lives full of color, joy, peace, and vitality? What if we're meant to live life in HD?
He mentioned you've been with us and enjoyed this series on Philippians. I want to give a little background in case maybe this is your first time and you're just joining us. So we call it the book of Philippians. It was actually a letter. It was a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Christians in a city called Philippi. So that's why we call it Philippians. It's a very interesting letter. It's not very long. We break it down into 4 chapters. When Paul wrote it, he didn't break it down into chapters. It's kind of like if you wrote a letter to a friend. You don't say chapter 1, you just write a letter. That's what he did. He wrote this letter, and they wouldn't have gone through it then like we're going through it now. They wouldn't have broken it down verse by verse or section by section. They would have simply received the letter, and when the church gathered together, they would have read it in its entirety. So they would have heard it. Now they would have gone back and read it multiple times and focused in on certain areas that were relevant to them as individuals or as a certain group within the church, because he mentions specific things to that church, needs, things that they have questions about. He mentions specific people. We're going to meet 2 of them today that he mentions by name. But what's amazing is 2,000 years later, that letter that Paul wrote that was inspired by the Holy Spirit still has relevance to us today as a church and as followers of Christ. So we have been going through this, and now we're going to finish up this morning the 2nd chapter of Philippians. And so we're going to finish chapter 2, and then next week we'll be on into chapter 3. So here's where we're going to pick up in chapter 2, verse 19. Paul's writing, and he says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you. So this is the first person he mentions by name. I hope to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him. There's no one in my life quite like Timothy, who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself. Paul has a very deep personal relationship with Timothy. Timothy is his protege. Paul more than likely led Timothy to faith in Jesus Christ, and Timothy, as he grew and began to follow the Lord, accompanied Paul on many of his missionary trips. There was a group of them that would go, and Timothy was often part of it. But Timothy wasn't always with Paul, because Paul would frequently send Timothy on jobs. He said, I got a job for you. I've got a mission for you. I've got a task for you. And he would send him and say, take care of this. Deal with that. That's what he's getting at here in this writing. He's saying, Timothy's here with me, but I'm hoping to soon send him to you so he can share some things. He can communicate some deeper things with you. See, they understood each other. Timothy understood the heart of Paul. As a matter of fact, of all the letters that Paul writes that we call books in the New Testament, 6 of them are actually co-authored by Timothy. We say it was written by Paul, but in the greeting it says Paul and Timothy. And then there's 2 other letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy, that are letters that Paul actually wrote to Timothy to encourage him, to help him understand how to better function as a pastor. He had left him at the city of Ephesus to pastor that church there. And so now Paul's writing to him. So there's a lot of depth in the relationship. There's a lot of communication back and forth between them. And then Paul goes on to dive more into their relationship. And this is what he says. For Timothy was as a son to a father. He has served me in the work of the gospel as a son with his father. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. Remember, Paul's in prison. And he's chained in prison in Rome. He may be released or he may be executed. He's saying, once I know what my sentence is, and then I'm hoping to send Timothy to you. But he's like a son to me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. So he's saying, I'm believing, I'm praying, I'm trusting God. I believe I've heard from the Lord that I'm going to be released from prison, and I too will get to come see you. But in the meantime, once things get resolved here, I'm going to send Timothy to you. See, they had a father-son relationship, a spiritual father to a spiritual son. Now, that's not a term we often use in our world outside of Christendom. You don't walk down into the halls of your office and your workplace and say, hey, there's my manager. He's my spiritual father. No, he's your boss. We just don't have that vernacular, but we think of in those terms in a lot of other ways. So in the business world, you might have a marketplace mentor, someone who helps you put your resume together, who gives you career advice, that helps you look at opportunities for promotion, who helps network you so that you know people in your industry. Those are hugely important. We also have things like personal trainers who take your physical health very serious, proper diet, proper exercise, how to achieve your fitness goals. We have tutors. They help you learn and study a particular subject to prepare for a test, the SAT or the ACTs. We have those ideas. We have financial planners, people who say, hey, what is it that you have financial goals about? Saving for your kids' college, preparing for retirement, wanting to buy a vacation home, whatever it is. So we see that kind of mentor relationship in most of life. We may have it or not have it, but they're there. We don't think anything of it. But then we get kind of squirmy when it's a spiritual father, a spiritual mother. Oh, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. So I don't want to use the term spiritual father and spiritual mother because sometimes that term, although it's biblical, can confuse us because we think it pertains only to the person who led us to Christ. But it may not be that person at all. It may be someone who simply at this time, in this season of your life, is guiding you and leading you to grow in the things of God. So this is how I would define a spiritual mentor. Someone who helps you orient your life from a Christian standpoint. And that's what makes it so powerful. It's how do I orient my life in a way that reflects Christianity? In other words, you might have a spiritual mentor who says, I want to help you, not just be a Christian who's a husband, but to be a husband who treats his wife in a way that honors the Lord. A spiritual mentor would say, I don't want you to just be a Christian business owner. I want you to be someone who leads their business based on Christian values, biblical values. I don't want you to just be a Christian mother. I want you to be a mother who instills in her children an understanding and a depth of the things of God, who reflects to her children what it means to follow Christ, to be gracious, to be patient, to be long-suffering. Although my wife will say, if she's on vacation, so I can say this, but if she was here, she would let me say it as well. She would say, I never had an anger issue until I had kids. So now, kids will bring out the best in you and the worst in you. So, how do I be a mom that doesn't reflect anger to my kids, but that reflects the fruit of the Spirit to them? So that's what a spiritual mentor will help you do, whatever area of life it is, vocationally, relationally, financially. How do I handle my finances in a God-honoring way? So we need that in our lives. It's actually something that's seen throughout the Scriptures, this whole idea of spiritual mentoring. Even before the Christian era, in the Old Testament, we see examples of this. Jethro was the father-in-law of Moses, and he mentored him. Moses then mentored Joshua. Elijah mentored Elisha. Naomi mentored her daughter-in-law Ruth. Jonathan, the heir to King Saul, when he knew that David was now to be anointed the next king, Jonathan mentored David. David, this is how you act in the king's presence. This is how you act in a royal manner. He mentored him. We see it in the New Testament. Elizabeth was the older cousin of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary went to her and Elizabeth mentored her. Jesus himself mentored a lot of people. He had the 120 that were his closest followers, but for them from there was 70 that he invested in. But from the 70 there was 12. There's 12 that he really poured his time into. We call them the 12 disciples. And then from the 12 there were 3, Peter, James, and John, that he was even closer with. Barnabas mentored Paul, and then Paul in turn mentored Timothy and also a man named Titus. It's something that's seen throughout the Bible because it's a biblical principle. So when Paul's writing to Timothy, at a different occasion, he's writing to him in 1 Timothy, and he touches on this idea of spiritual parenting, of how do we show that kind of depth of connection with people in our lives. And this is what he says. Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. He's saying there's something there. And then in Titus, when he's writing to Titus, he in chapter 2, he gets in more in depth on what that mentoring relationship looks like, how it functions within the body of Christ. Because the whole thing is this. It's not that spiritual mentoring is a nifty idea. It would be fun if it happened. It's good if it can do it, but don't worry about it. It's an imperative. I would almost say it's a command, but that may be a wee bit strong. But it is something that's expected of us. Spiritual mentoring is supposed to be happening in your life. But the sad reality is it doesn't. For most of us, we don't have a spiritual mentor. Oh, there might be an author we like and we read their books. There may be a speaker we like and we listen to their podcast or watch them on YouTube or listen to them on the radio. There may be people in our lives that we learn some things from, but it's not a mentoring relationship. Because while mentoring can happen in a group setting, it's always, 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 always at the heart. It has a one-on-one aspect to it. So yes, Jesus had the 12 disciples, but there were times throughout the 3.5 years where he was with them where he had one-on-one conversations with them. Because there's always a one-on-one aspect of mentoring. Because really, we call it mentoring, but it's really discipleship. You could call it what you want, but mentoring at its heart is discipleship. And discipleship is how we grow in the things of God. It's how we're challenged. It's how our faith sometimes is challenged. How we think sometimes is challenged. The decisions that we make sometimes are challenged. Because we have somebody who's saying, now, is this lined up? Is this oriented towards a Christian way of living? Is this lined up with what Jesus taught? Is this lined up with what the New Testament teaches? And it challenges us, but it ought to. See, discipleship happens between a Christian with something to learn and a Christian with something to teach. But there has to be a one-on-one dynamic to it. It doesn't have to just be that. Listen, you can be in a small group and discipleship is happening. But there also ought to be times where there's one-on-one conversations. You can go deeper. You can get into some things. And people can speak. I mean, I've had people in my life that will say things that make me feel good as a mentor. Oh, man, that's encouraging. And then they've turned around and hit me between the eyes with a 2x4. And it hurts. But thank God that they had the love in their heart to say those things to me. And thank God they didn't say it in a group setting. They said, let me talk to you, Justin. And they would lay the 2x4. But they did it out of love, grace, because they cared about me. Because we need that in our lives. People who will love, invest, pray for you, share the things in their life that they've struggled with, and take you under their wing and say, I've got something to deposit in you if you have something you're willing to learn. Are you willing to learn? I'm willing to teach. It's that kind of dynamic. So here's my question for you. Do you have a spiritual mentor in your life? Not did you, not have you in the past. Do you currently actively have a spiritual mentor in your life? Someone that you know right now, if you had to, you could pick up the phone and call them, and they would be there for you. Not a friend, not a family member. We might have those. I'm talking about someone. If you said, I am up against it, and I need spiritual guidance in this area, I could call them right now. If you don't have that, you need that. We all need that. So, I want to give you 4 ways in which to, if you want a spiritual mentor, to go about trying to find one. Here's the first thing you need to do. Determine what you need. What is it that you need? Do you need to be taught the basics of the faith? How to read the Bible, how to pray, how to learn to hear the voice of God, how to walk in obedience to the things of God, how to understand what the gifts of the Spirit are and activate them in your life, how to develop the fruit of the Spirit in your life? Do you need the basics? Do you need someone who's more of a spiritual counselor, who's going to really challenge the way you process things, that you've kind of just said, well, I know Christian stuff, but I can live my own way, and I really need someone who's going to hold my feet to the fire. I wouldn't, what I often hear people say is, yeah, I want someone who's going to hold me accountable. I have determined for myself that if somebody ever asks me, can you hold me accountable? My answer will always be no, I can't. But you can use me to hold yourself accountable. Because if you say, can I hold you accountable, then the responsibility is mine. I'm supposed to somehow know in the moment of your greatest struggle that I'm supposed to call you and say, how are you doing with that? No, but you can use me to hold you accountable. And when you're struggling, you can call me anytime you want. And that 2 o'clock in the morning phone call, if you need me, I'll answer. But do you need someone like that? Do you need someone to teach you things, how to orient your finances and your time in a way that honors God, to position your career path in those ways? So you have to determine what it is that you need. And you're the only one who knows that. What is it that you need? Are you struggling in some area of walking in obedience? And I need someone to help me with that. So determine what you need. Then the next thing is this. Find the person. Find the person that can help you. And you do that by two ways, looking for them and asking about them. So you may say, I don't know anybody that can help me. Ask. Ask people that you know. Ask your small group leader. Ask a pastor. Ask a leader in the church. Hey, do you know anybody that's really, I'm struggling as a mom. I'm struggling as a dad. Do you know anybody who's really just doing a wonderful job in their parenting? I'm struggling to run my business. Do you know anybody who's had success in the business world? I'm struggling with this area or that area. I want to grow. I've never understood how to read the Bible. Do you know anybody that's just doing a great job in their prayer and their personal devotional life that I can go to for help? Or just look. Keep your eyes open. See people on a Sunday morning. See people throughout the week and say, they're nailing it in a way that I'm not. So find the person. You have to look. You have to keep your eyes open. You have to ask. When you find the person, then you have to do this. You have to make the ask. You have to make the ask. Now, what I mean by that is when you approach them, the first thing to say is not this, oh, will you be my spiritual mentor? I mean, you can do that, but, normally it's a wee bit like, just blowing somebody away with a fire hydrant when they just want to go to the water fountain. So here's a better approach. Just go to them and say, hey, I've noticed that you really seem to be having success in this area of your life, whatever that is. Or you really seem to have grown and overcome some things in your life, and I'm struggling with myself. Would you have time to grab a cup of coffee or lunch or breakfast? Or I just want to ask you a few questions. My guess is that the majority of the time, and almost 100% I can guarantee anyone in this church, any man or woman in this church who's got some years and maturity and seasoning in the things of God, if you just say, can I get together with you for an hour? They're going to make the time for you. They're going to set that time aside and meet with you. So find the opportunity to make the ask. Say, is this the person that can help me? Listen, if you make that ask even of me, more often than not, I'll say yes. And if I have to say no, if I don't have the time, if I can't make the time to do that, I will always, always, always point you in the direction of someone who can. And someone who could probably do it better than I could anyway. So you don't always have to say yes, or that person may not always say yes, but my guess is they'll either say yes or they'll point you to somebody who's even better. But make the ask. And when you get together, again, don't say, okay, thank you for having coffee with me, and then just throw every question that you've ever had about life and success on their lap. Get to know them. Just take some time. Hey, let me ask you, how long have you been married? How long have you been in business? What are some of the things that you've found that you wish you could do over again in life? Just get to know them. What you're trying to do at that point is learn two things. One, can they teach you what you need? And is there a connection between you? You've looked at them, somebody's mentioned them to you, you've seen things in their life, and you get to know them a little bit better, and you realize, oh, I thought they had a great marriage. I thought they had it nailed in parenting, and then you find out their marriage is just a facade, and their parenting is falling off the tracks. Okay, they're not the person for you. Or you realize there's just not a fit. My personality and their temperament aren't the same. So, okay. But if there is those things, then you can begin to wade into the possibility of a mentoring relationship. So when you sit down, get to know them. As you get to know them, if you feel like they have what you need, they can teach you what you need, and there's a connection, then here's the last thing. When you meet, be prepared. Be prepared. Listen to me. I can't tell you how many times someone wants to meet, they want to sit down, they want to have coffee, and I'll say to them, so what can I help you with? And they'll say, I don't know. Well, listen, this may be your one chance to have coffee with this person. Be prepared. John Maxwell, who is considered one of the gurus of leadership, he talks about when he was a young man in the late 60s. And he was just starting in leadership, and he thought he was a leader because he was the high school football captain, and he was on led the student government. And then he got into real leadership in the business world and in the church world, and he realized he couldn't lead his way out of a paper bag. He said, I need to learn how to do this. So he made a list of the top 10 leaders in his field. And this is in the late 60s, and he's broke. He doesn't have a lot of money, but he writes a letter to them and says, I'll pay you $100 for a half hour of your time. If I'm ever in your area, would you meet with me for a half hour? I'll pay you $100. And when he heard back from any of them, if they said yes, he planned all of his vacations with his wife around where they said yes. So no matter where he was living, if he was in L.A. and the person was in Cleveland, that's where they took vacation. And they went to Cleveland and they met with him. And he said, when I would go there, I had a list of questions that I was prepared to ask him. Because I might never get another half hour with this man or this woman. And I want to make it count. So be prepared. In other words, if you sit down with the person, ask specific questions. Don't say, well, I'm just wondering, how can I be a better husband? Well, can I just say, that's a superfluous question. It doesn't, how do you be a better husband? I mean, there's books about that. Ask specific questions. Ask questions like this. I've got a 3-year-old, and for some reason, they just won't sit still. They're rambunctious. They're a tyrannical person to their mom. How did you handle discipline with your kids when they were that age? Now, that's a great question. Now it's specific to what you need, to what you're going through at that moment in life. Maybe it's, hey, have you ever, I've got an opportunity in my career, but I'm not sure if it's the right thing because I don't know if the career promotion will take away from what my family needs. Yeah, I'll have more money, but I may not be able to be there for my family. Have you ever had to make a decision in your career that you sacrificed moving your career forward for the sake of your family? And how did you know it was the right call to make? That person will share some deep things if they've had that experience. Maybe you say something like, how did you, when you had young kids and you're trying to start your business, how did you make time for your family to make sure that they didn't feel like they were second in the priority list, or third, or fourth, or eighth? How did you do that? Because I'm struggling with that. Ask specific questions, but you have to be prepared. Go into it. Have them written down. Be prepared. And then, you've had coffee, you've had lunch, you've asked some of these questions. End the conversation something like this. Thank you so much. This has been a great help to me. I appreciate this. Would you be open? Would you be willing down the road, if I've got some more specific questions about some things going on in my life, would you be willing to do this again? I don't want to take a lot of your time, but would you be willing to do that at some point? If they say yes, you know what? You've now started a spiritual mentoring relationship. And it's wonderful, and it's awesome, and it can be life-giving, and at some point you may look back and say, that person was like a spiritual mother or a spiritual father to me. Now, I want to say a word to those that may be approached. And somebody comes to you and asks, please, make me look good and say yes. They need you. They're asking because they need something. They need your wisdom. They need your experience. They need your life learnings to be poured into them. So say yes. But just like the two questions, do they have what, can they teach what I need to know, and is there a connection? You can ask those same things about yourself. Can I teach what they need to know, and do I feel a connection? If you don't, then it's fine to say, hey, this coffee was great. I see what you need. I know somebody who would be even better. And point them to somebody else. That's fine. Don't step into that role and then let them down. But I also want to say this. Now, this is the main responsibility falls on the person who wants to be mentored. Okay? So, in other words, if you're an older person, and I don't mean chronologically in age, but older in the Lord. You've been walking with the Lord for 8, 10, 12 years, and you see somebody and you want to invest in them. It's fine for you to go and say, hey, can I have lunch? There's some things, I think I might like to share with you. They may say yes, they may say no, but at some point, the person who needs a spiritual father, spiritual mother, they have to pursue them. You can't want that relationship for them more than they want it for themselves, or you'll run yourself in circles. Think about the story of the prodigal son. The Father knew what the Son needed, and the Father waited for the Son to say, I need this. Now, we don't know if the Father ever ventured out and looked for him, but we know at the end, it didn't take until the Son came back. So in my own life, when I first met Dr. Rutland, he's a mentor to me. He's a spiritual father to me. When I first met him and kind of got to know each other, I'm thinking there's a connection here. I'm thinking the guy likes me, and anything he can teach is going to help me. And he says to me, hey, Justin, at the end of our time together, he said, hey, here's my phone number. Here's my number. You can call and text anytime. I mean, I told my wife, it was like, oh, I got Dr. Rutland's phone number. But he never called me. He never said, now, I gave you my number all these months ago. Everything all right? It was on me to pursue that relationship. I didn't overwhelm him. I mean, listen, I wanted to text him 8 times a day and be like, hey, what are you eating for breakfast? I couldn't do that. Don't overwhelm the person. Don't come across as needy. But over time, I would reach out to him. Hey, I'm going through this. I'm struggling with that. I've got this question in leading a church. And I would ask him, and he would be gracious and reply. And that relationship has grown and developed. And now, 15 years later, it's wonderful. I see him, and it's like seeing a father. Now, here's the other thing I want to say. For some of you, you have that relationship with your natural mom, your natural dad. They are a spiritual parent in your life. That, if you have that, rejoice. Not a lot of people do. But if you have that, it doesn't mean they need to be the only one in your life. Because believe it or not, there may be times where you need to talk about something and they're not the best person to give you that advice. Because a parent, by definition, is going to be somewhat biased. They're going to have your best interest at heart, and they may not always be willing to say the hard thing, or you may be struggling with something with them. And say, Mom is driving me crazy. Dad's driving me nuts. I need to talk to somebody about this. How do I honor my father and my mother? Well, it's hard to go to them and say, Mom, you're driving me nuts. I want to honor you. Stop being nuts. I did that once. No, I didn't. So that's how you do that. I'm in the point in my life at 45 where I've learned something that I can, even at 45, when I'm 55, when I'm 65, I still want to be around people who have years and life and experience in front of me and sit down and have coffee with them and learn from them. When I was preparing this message, I wrote down names of people that I said, I want to find a way to connect with them. Probably going to cost me more than $100 to buy a half hour of their time, but it's worth the investment. But I've also learned I've got years of experience on other people, 15, 20 years that I can pour into. So I need to be both a Timothy to learn things and a Paul to teach things. But that's true for all of us. You can be both a Paul and a Timothy. It's what we're called to do. So then Paul introduces us to the second person that he mentions in this letter. He says this, I think it's necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker, and a fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs, for he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died, but God had mercy on him and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. So he introduces us to Timothy, then Epaphroditus. We don't know much about Epaphroditus. As a matter of fact, everything we know about Epaphroditus, we just learned right here. We know he was from Philippi. The church in Philippi found out that Paul was in prison in chains in Rome, so they sent him. We get the idea later on that they sent him with a gift, something to help him, some way to encourage him in his imprisonment. So he sends him there, and he calls him a fellow brother in Christ, a soldier, a worker, gives all these great things, but he falls ill and he nearly dies for the cause of Christ. So Paul now says he's well, he's overcome the illness, he didn't die, I'm sending him back to you. I'm sending him back to you because it will encourage you to see that he's well and that what you sent to me has made a difference. So he sends Epaphroditus back, but then he says this at the close of this chapter. He says, welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you could not give me. Honor men like him. So now he's laying out a principle that doesn't just apply to Epaphroditus. It applies to all of Christianity for all of time. It's the idea of honor. He doesn't say honor him. He says honor men like him. Honor men and women who excel in advancing the cause of Christ. I did a series a few months ago called the Husband versus Wife Marriage Challenge. We talked about honoring, outdoing one another in honor. Here's what honor means. It's to give high regard or respect, to esteem, or as we learned in that series, to treat another person as valuable, costly, precious. In other words, he's saying you need to honor people who excel in advancing the cause of Christ. We're great at honoring people in our culture. We honor athletes who handle themselves well on and off the field. We honor artists and musicians who invest and spend years in perfecting their craft and their and devotion to making the best art that they can. Why do we honor them? Because they inspire us. But I'm afraid that somehow we have lost the idea that we need to honor those in the church, that we need to honor those who demonstrate excellence and devotion in advancing God's kingdom. We just don't do it. We don't do it well, and we don't do it often. I think sometimes I hear excuses that don't hold a lot of water. Things like, well, I just don't think there are a lot of people who deserve honor. Or, well, there's people who demand honor, but they're not worthy of honor. Or I want to withhold honor because I don't want them to be puffed up and full of pride and ego. But the thing is this, honor is something we're commanded to do. Honor one another. Honor is something we're supposed to give. And I think what we forget sometimes is that honor actually brings a smile to God's face. See, honoring people for their service to God is actually one way of honoring God himself. When you honor others, you're actually honoring God. It's what we're called to do. So maybe you need to ask yourself, who do I need to honor in my life? Who do I need to honor that's going above and beyond in serving God and advancing his kingdom? Could it be someone who works week in and week out down in the Roots Kids Ministry area? They just need a way to be honored and thanked. Could it be a single mom who's constantly and regularly here serving in the guest services area and just making people feel welcome? Could it be the person who took a risk and invited you to church, not knowing if you'd reject them? And you've come to church and you've reoriented your life and now you're living for the things of God, and that person needs honor. Could it be your small group leader that you as a group just say, hey, let's honor this person. They invest a lot into us. Let's honor them. There is a power when we honor people. So what does all this mean? It means we need mentors to pour into our lives and honor to pour out of our lives. That's what this section is teaching us. We need those who will pour into our lives, and we need honor to pour out of our lives. That's part of what this baptism celebration that we're about to do is all about. We're celebrating. There are those who are going to be baptized this morning by a parent, by someone who's invested into their life, a mentor. We honor that. And then we honor their decision to be baptized, and we celebrate with them. That's why listen, I saw the Vanderwins truck drive up. I was about to wrap up my message. We can all get ice cream. There's a reason we do that, because we want to celebrate together. We want to know that is part of what the local church is designed for, that we can know and be known. We can love and be loved. We can serve and be served. We can celebrate and be celebrated. We can honor those that make a decision to say, I want to be baptized. So, do you have a mentor in your life? Do you have a spiritual mentor in your life? If not, find one. And who do you need to honor that is excelling in advancing the kingdom of God? Let's pray.
Life is hard. Every day, anxieties, sin, worries, and fears cloud our vision. They consume us. They rob us of our ability to see clearly, our ability to live. But what if we don't have to live this way? What if we were meant to experience life differently? What if we're meant to live lives full of color, joy, peace, and vitality? What if we're meant to live life in HD?